to some of the people that came on the Fed Up Trainers course recently, because done a lot of replicating in this little bit here. You've already got quite a lot of information. So yeah, yeah, go now. Be the traffic. So I'm Keenan. As Jen said, I work for Feedback, which was an environmental food charity really, but now focuses a lot more on food justice or food security for people. My colleague Lucy, who I know quite a few people probably know, there's usually a lot of people know Lucy Antal when you're in a room with anyone in Liverpool. She works with me on this project. She is really the brains behind a lot of it. Lucy wrote the book on a lot of these sort of like issues, and she's very, very knowledgeable, and I am not, which begs the question why I'm here and not Lucy. Unfortunately, she had to go down to London today, so you kind of stuck with me. So I'm the Programme Development Manager for Feedback in the Northwest. I design projects, I work with network of partners like Food in Liverpool, work on funding, monitoring, also do a lot of project delivery. Our work at the moment is focusing on access to fresh food, education around food, and also advocacy, and speaking to authority bodies and communicating what we find when we do boots on the ground work with participants of our projects, and communicate that upwards. So it's grassroots to grass tips is what our head office says. So yeah, that's sort of a bit of a background about what we're doing. In practice, food access, we're working with Feed in Liverpool on the veg bus, mobile fruit and veg market. We are also setting up allotment projects in 4 locations across Knowsley, made out of recycled bathtubs. There is a reason, but we'll go into it. Education, we're working on the Fed Up courses. Obviously, some of you came on the training courses. We're delivering directly to people in communities as well. And then advocacy, to be honest, a lot of that is Lucy's work. She's been beating the drum for a lot of years now, she plays an active role in the Good Food Plan in Liverpool, does a lot of sort of strategic and policy work as well. So let me get on to the main bit of this. I'll start by talking a little bit about what we do when we apply for funding and we do sort of write our budgets. Some of it might be completely common sense. You may already do this. Apologies if that's the case. So what we tend to do is we have a mixture of long-term and short-term funding. We try to go for, I suppose this is the benefit of being part of a larger organisation in Feedback. We go to funders and we make ambitious asks for long-term funding that covers the majority of Lucy and my salary. We also work with local funders, but we try to go for those big pots of money that don't have as much project delivery attached to them. We work with a funder called Moondance, who kind of fund us in the abstract a little bit. They kind of like what we do. We've been funded by them a long time, and they like a lot of what we do. A lot of participatory stuff with communities. We are funded by Live Housing Group for work in Knowsley. A lot of that is participation and engagement, but a lot of that is also the allotments, the cooking courses, and they also make some contributions to our time to deliver work as well. But we have been very fortunate because we are able to communicate to them and place value at every stage of the projects that we deliver with them. So using Live Housing as an example of that, we have made a real case for actually if you support us in the long term and give us some security in our roles, it means that we're not having to constantly fundraise and chase funding. We can be a bit more discerning with the funders that we work with. We can really think about the work that we want to deliver, how we deliver it. And that's a really important part of our funding strategy over the last couple of years. Now, what we also do is we try to appeal to smaller pots of usually more local funding for actual project delivery that tie into our 3 strategic aims of education, access and advocacy. So a great example of this is we are working with a chap down in Hale Wood who came on our cooking courses, now participates on the allotment project. And he wanted to set up a community cafe down in Hale Wood. We've managed to attract a small funding pot for him to pilot that. We'll provide some support, but it's part of our community engagement, and we have listened and we've heard that he would like to do this and he thinks it would benefit his residents. So that's something that we're trying to support. So yeah, essentially we look for that sort of melded funding approach. We try to get multi-year, and then we try to pick up some smaller pots of funding that actually help us deliver specific work, boots on the ground stuff along the way. So one of our main priorities, even when wrapped up in project delivery, as I said, is engagement, to better understand the wants and needs of the communities that we work within. And that enables us to be, I wouldn't necessarily say reactive, because I think that's a bit of a dangerous word when you talk about funding, and that sort of leads down the path of sort of a lot of emergency food provision things, and people are really, they're reactive. It allows us to be a bit more responsive to what we hear, and that's why we place engagement at the centre of everything. Every single project that we deliver, hopefully, allows enough opportunity for the people we work with to tell us how we're doing, tell us what future work they'd like to see, tell us what barriers that they're facing across all of our strategic aims. And that means that we can go to our funders with confidence and say, we would like you to fund X, Y and Z. And again, fortunately, we're in a position where we've got a few long-term funders who are willing to take our word for it. So, moving on to a couple of real practical things, which I'm sure you all know about, but it's something that I've sort of learned working for on these food projects for the last 3 years with Feedback. Our multi-year funding applications have year-on-year increases as you go in your budgets. Cover your cost of living increases, particularly on salaries. Your food prices are going to go up, inflation happens. We have in the past had some funding where funders are reluctant to make that increase. It makes it really, really difficult to tie yourself in for 3 years. So all the benefits of your 3-year security and funding quite quickly evaporates when you don't have enough money in the pot at the end of it. We apply a minimum of a 5% contingency in our budget. Ideally, we'd like to match inflation, wherever that might be in the future, but somewhere between 5 and 10% on our budgets, particularly on the longer term things. Usually we only apply those when there is not a set limit. So if somebody turned around and said, here's a 5k pot and it funds specific things, they're probably not going to go for your 5% contingency, but we try to sneak it in when possible, and if we get it, then fantastic. The other thing that's been touched on a little bit, and I know that a lot of organisations, a lot of projects rely on volunteers, but my view is that staff time being covered, that's where we start. And I know that's difficult as a sort of people who work in communities when you see there's such great need and you see that people require so much support at the moment. It's difficult to think, well, I'll look after myself first, but in reality, if you can't fund yourself long term, or you can't fund a staff team, then you're not going to be able to deliver the good work that you want to deliver for communities. Volunteering can be a brilliant thing. It can be mutually beneficial. People can really get something out of it. It might just give them a warm, fuzzy feeling. It might give them career development. I believe in being completely transparent. If somebody comes and says to us, I want to volunteer with you because we've had this recently, because I want to change my career and I want to work in food policy and I'm passionate about the circular economy, I believe it's really important to turn around and say, that's brilliant, but what I need right now is you to drive a van because I don't drive and I need bathtubs transporting from Stanley Grange down to Hale Wood. Is that okay? There may be opportunities in the future, but don't hang on to that hope. And if there's another organisation that's better suited to your needs and your development, he wanted to volunteer as well. He'd left a job so he could have volunteering opportunities. And I thought it was important to be really transparent with him and say, you're going to be driving a van, is that all right? However, if you find somebody, a volunteer, is taking up a role within your organisation that is so integral to your operation, it's also really important. You can't just wave a magic wand and get funding, or just create the money. I know it's really difficult to do that, but when you're thinking about a funding strategy, then that person or that role should be a priority for filling. So look after yourself, fund yourself, you can do the good work, and when you're looking at raising capacity or expanding your team, particularly if you're working with volunteers, I think otherwise it can be a little bit of an imbalanced relationship between an organisation or project and a volunteer. So, I've just covered that before I moved over my slide. A great example of this actually is, it's on one of our projects. We worked with a young man called Tom, and he dropped his days, he wasn't the other volunteer, but he dropped his days working as a chef in a kitchen. You guys have met Tom that came on the cooking course with us.
he was brilliant, and he just really turned his hand to everything, and he was really, really active. And Adam and I'll talk a bit more about how the arrangement works with Tom in a second, but Adam and I said we want him on board, we want to give him an employment opportunity. He wasn't loving the sharp end of chef work in the kitchen and being part of service. So he came on board with us. He works a couple of days a week with us, and he works a couple of days a week with Adam. And that's when volunteering can be really brilliant, because we found the money for him, and he loves doing what he's doing now, which is a fantastic sort of little story. And a great example of why Tom is so fantastic for our project now is that he works on the Fed Up cooking courses with us. He works in the kitchens prepping for Adam's new restaurant that's opening. And he works on the allotment sites with me on a Wednesday, but I've got a meeting tomorrow with Colin and Naomi talking about more Train the Trainers courses, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. So it's fantastic. So it means that I know I can leave Tom with participants down the allotment in Hale Wood. He can carry on. He's met all of them multiple times. He's worked with them on cooking courses, and I have the peace of mind to know that I've got a member of staff there who can do the job, and it means it frees me up to do less of the project delivery and more of the planning and development. Quick thing on food suppliers. Where possible, we work with independent local suppliers. I think I'm probably preaching to the converted on that from the conversation we've just had. Localising supply chains and working with seasonal produce is an important consideration in sustainability. There's huge benefits in empowering and creating local independent businesses. It produces more investment in local economy. Generally speaking, better training. People that really care about their community are going to do a better job of training their staff and paying higher wages and things like that, in my opinion. More training opportunities, and offers people agency and creates local food production, which actually Liverpool and Merseyside in general doesn't have a great history of food production. It's something that my colleague Lucy could speak a lot more eloquently about than I can, but it's something that we're looking to do, and I think that if we are giving people the opportunity and passion training and giving them the tools to do it, then it would only enhance our region. So in terms of sustainability within food, that's that little bit. Quick little chat about plant-based food projects. We're kind of accidentally plant-based in a lot of the work that we do. I know the Fed Up cooking courses aren't, but that's because it's Adam's body of work. But whenever we do things independently of Adam, whenever we prepare things and people come up to our base or we're out in communities, the practicalities of cooking plant-based food is easier than having to deal with the whole consideration of meat. The other thing to consider is that Feedback actually has policy teams and campaigns, and one of the campaigns that Feedback runs is the reduction of or the increase in consumption of high welfare meat compared to factory farmed meat sources. Now, I was talking to Lee about this just over the counter over lunch, and I said the difficulty is, if I stand in front of a group of people on a cooking course or down at an allotment who I know are really struggling financially, I know they're quite entrenched in their ideals potentially about what they want to eat. If I say to them, well, do what I do, just eat less meat across the week, right? And what you should do is you should buy a free-range chicken that's corn-fed, and that's going to cost you 12 quid, but just eat less meat, because that's what me and my wife do, so why don't you just do it? It would be completely ridiculous to do that. So what we try to do, instead of focusing on the negative impacts of intensive farming and the bad environmental impacts of that sort of like way of farming meat, we focus on the positives of how great something can be, how cost effective a bag of red split lentils can be, how lovely a chickpea curry is, all of these things. We try to be as positive about the benefits of that as possible rather than focus on the negatives. And we also say, listen, bang for your buck. I always use the analogy, my mum had 5 children and I'm one of them, right? Imagine feeding 5 children that look like me. Obviously I'm much more handsome. But she always used to water down her meat with the red lentils, and we never noticed the difference, and it just made it stretch further. So realistically, in terms of environmental impact, probably health benefits a lot of the time, and also cost impacts. That's why we do that. But we're kind of plant-based by accident, because we're a bit lazy more than anything. So
practicalities of running a project. Donated and surplus food. I was a little bit worried about talking about this when I was stood listening to Lee earlier, but some of the other speakers have sort of touched upon this. Supply chains of surplus food to feed people living in food poverty cannot and should not be the long-term model for dealing with alleviating food poverty, right? We need to find a better way than that, because more than anything else, if the supply chains are disrupted or there's more demand than there is donations, that can cause a real issue to the sustainability of your project. You don't want to get caught in a trap of thinking, I'm doing a fantastic thing for reducing food waste and I'm feeding people. I will completely acknowledge there's a lot of emergency food provision with fantastic people who are doing fantastic things for people that really, really need them in communities right now. But realistically, should that be something that you're hinging your strategy on for the next 5, 10, 15 years, where you're talking about a regional food place or regional food policy or strategy? I don't personally believe so. I know different working models work differently. So I'm talking about, I've heard horror stories about fair shares and things like this. I'm not necessarily, I don't know enough about these guys' model to comment properly on that. So I think that realistically you've got to have commercial viability. If you are, I like the idea of progressive pricing, and people that can pay more do pay more. People that can't afford to do so without judgment do eat, and we look after each other. I do like that idea. Okay, I know that we're sort of like against time. If I seem a bit rushed, that's why, sorry.
You're doing great.
Thank you. Importance of relationships, both in terms of your delivery partners and also the engagement that you have with your participants or beneficiaries, whatever you might call them. So working collaboratively has benefited our work massively and allowed us to expand beyond our internal capacity and expertise. Lucy and I work, Lucy works 4 days a week, I work 5 days a week, and that's only fairly recent that we've had the budget to get to that level. We've obviously got Tom 2 days a week, but we share him with Adam. So 1 day a week on an allotment and 1 day a week in a kitchen on a cooking course. So realistically, if we're talking about food access, food education, food advocacy, we're buying buses with Feeding Liverpool and getting a mobile fruit and veg market going, and I don't know if we're sensible for thinking this. We want to flee, despite the hard work it's taken us to get to this point, right? We want to be proactive, we want to be ambitious. We're setting up 4 allotments. If you think for a second that Tom and I have the expertise to build 4 allotments, you're absolutely wrong. But we're trying to do it. But working in collaboration with Adam Franklin, the horse and jockey, and his kitchen team, and Tom forms that on the cooking courses, means that we have to facilitate and manage a project rather than be there for all of the project delivery. Working with Feeding, and on the trainers course with Feeding Liverpool, actually facilitating some of you guys coming up on the course, meant that I didn't have to do that, which is what I would normally have to do. So my life was a dream. I just had to turn up and chat and send out an information pack at the end of it. This is how working collaboratively can really benefit us. And obviously for you guys that came on the course, you know that I handed over an example of funding bids that we've written. I handed over a budget, I handed over all of the kitchen protocols, all of the risk assessments, all of the lesson plans, all of the recipe packs, right? We believe that the Fed Up cooking course is a brilliant model for getting people cooking and also providing a bit of education work if it's supported by food access and advocacy and all of the things I've talked about. So why would we not want to get that message out as much as possible? Why would I not want you to be able to successfully fundraise if you're going to come on a cooking course? So we're really committed to creating these small pilot projects that work really closely with participants. We can really listen to what they want and what they need, and then we can communicate that out. And those small replicable models can then have that ripple effect that was mentioned earlier in your communities, where you know the people better than anybody else could know those people. So the importance of relationships, the importance of using other organisations and working collaboratively with them to build your internal capacity. I know it's already happening, we've heard about that. That's something that's transformed how we operate, from constantly worrying about not having the labour budget we've currently got the head. We want a community engagement officer, and we can't afford one, or we can have one for 2 days a week. But we might be able to find a solution to that by working with delivery partners. We work with Live Housing Group and their many departments. They've got a mental health and wellbeing team that they signpost people to support, they signpost people to us, we give people their details and they can get in touch with them. I've also, because there's a local organisation that I've just been put in touch with, I think it's worth mentioning that when we're looking for funding, I'm seeing a lot of people talking about adjacent issues, or I'm seeing funding bids where, like, obviously if somebody's struggling to pay their bills and can't put gas and electric on the meter and they're not eating properly, of course their mental health or mental well-being is going to break down. So I'm looking at a lot of things. Of course, that, you know, addiction levels are going to go up and all of these things. I would call them adjacent social issues to the ones that we're specifically working on, but we don't have the expertise to work on them specifically. So I'm trying to find partnerships with mental health providers who really do have those bespoke expertise, which means that I can say on a funding bid, with their consent obviously, that we're going to work with so-and-so, and yes, we do meet the criteria because we're working in partnership with them, but a lot of the practical stuff that we'll do is working with us, and we think that that will also improve their mental health. But I think it pays to really pull expertise in from elsewhere and to work, and obviously the structures of that are important. You know, a lot of the work that we do with Feeding Liverpool, we have an MOU for every strand of work, and it just keeps us all clean and keeps us all clear about what role we're playing within it, particularly if money's moving hands.
What's an MOU?
Memorandum of Understanding. It's basically an agreement, but it's not legally binding. So in theory, we could really screw over Feeding Liverpool, and there'd be no legal repercussions, but of course we would never do that. I think that to finish, just about on time, an example of raising capacity and sustaining a project is really shown through the Fed Up cooking courses. We've got about the capacity to deliver 6 4-week cooking courses per year. We may go up slightly next year in the new financial year. It's funded by Live Housing. But realistically, that project's got legs in it, and we think it's fantastic, great model. So for us, it makes much more sense to show other people what we're doing so that they can then do it in their communities, with the bit of sort of give and take, so we get a bit of reporting, nothing sort of onerous, but people can then develop their own cooking courses, follow a sort of principle that we think works, more people get to benefit from the project, and Fed Up network all of a sudden is hitting hundreds of people rather than the 60 that we might be able to hit. So I think that's a really good example of how we've raised our capacity by working with Feeding Liverpool and obviously with the other sort of practitioners, some of which are in the room, to deliver cooking courses in their way, in their space. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. Yeah, I think we're good. I think we're there. Cheers, guys. I don't know if anyone does have any questions or if we've got time for any questions, but yeah, okay. Any questions I will happily answer if there's time. No?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Keenan. That was brilliant.
Cheers,
I
guys.
really enjoyed that. As we close